Now here on Radio 4, Mastertapes, the series in which John Wilson talks to songwriters about a career-defining album. And tonight it's the first part of a special double A-side edition, where John's guests in the BBC Maida Vale studios are three musicians from Wales.
Welcome to Mastertapes and to Manic Street Preachers playing live for our audience here at the BBC Maida Vale studios. James Dean Bradfield, Nicky Wire and Sean Moore are here to talk and play their way back to 1994 and the making of the Holy Bible. The band's third album, it's a lyrical and musical expression of anger, frustration and despair. It's also an epitaph of sorts for Richie Edwards, the band's lyricist, who battled depression, anorexia and alcoholism and who disappeared months after the album's release. The Holy Bible is hailed by many fans and critics as a masterpiece. Nicky, James and Sean, welcome to Mastertapes. I think usually the question of whether an album is a so-called tough listen is entirely subjective, but in the case of the Holy Bible, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that it's indisputable. I mean, it's a record which teems with emotional pain. It's a record that really gets under the skin and lodges, often uncomfortably, in the brain. When you were first making it, did you expect it to sound like that and for that to be the effect?
It didn't feel that uncomfortable making it, I have to be honest. It was a really kind of well-natured, happy session making the record. And we were still convincing ourselves that there was some sort of commercial viability in it. Then taking it on tour and playing it live and the words getting shouted out every night and sung back to you by audiences, it kind of seemed to take on something more serious.
And James, I mentioned there that many people regard it, often describe it routinely almost as a masterpiece. How do you regard it now alongside the other albums?
I regard it as an amazing rock and roll album, which is just infused with complete intent and ideas and observation, which is probably exactly what we wanted to do at the start. I just didn't know I'd quite take that form. It's a very nihilistic rock and roll album.
It's a very nihilistic record. And when we look at some of the subjects that are covered lyrically, we get prostitution and capital punishment and the Holocaust and self-harm and anorexia. And as such, Nicky, is very much an insight into clearly a tortured mind, that of Richie Edwards. I mean, just to give a sense of where he was at the time, mentally, when you arrived in the studio.
Richie just bought a flat in Cardiff. I just got married and I was living in a nice little house in the valleys. And we kind of thought we'd gained our self-control after Gold Against the Soul, you know, where we'd kind of lived the residential recording dream, and we were in this tiny little studio in Cardiff. We felt really self-centred in that we were totally going against everything that was happening outside, and that's when sometimes we make our best records, when we are cocooned.
Backs against the wall.
I think Richie it wasn't just tortured, he was actually just reaching some sort of peak of intelligence. He was just reading so much. He was taking in just so much culture that, I mean, I couldn't keep up with him. No way. Half of the references when he was bringing lyrics in, me and James would look at each other and go, who is Horthy? Who is Tisu? You know, and you kind of, that made it really exciting because you just felt it was just a writer at the very top of his game.
And we did see that, there was a lot of dark introspection there, but he was looking outwards as well towards the world, you know, with If White America, with Archives of Pain, Walking Emotions. You can see him look into the outward world and seeing how perhaps humanity is reacting to it. It wasn't just all complete introspection.
He'd been treated at the Priory, hadn't he? Had he already been in the Priory before you started working on this record?
No.
That was after.
No.
That was afterwards.
It did become something of a self-fulfilling prophecy after that, I guess, in some ways. But I guess one of the keys to it was on a really bad tour of Germany, Gold Against the Soul tour. Everyone was drinking heavily, I think, and especially Richie. And on the days off, in typically Manic's fashion, we went to the death camps. it did have a massive influence on us. I remember writing No Birds, which became Mausoleum very quickly after that, because there was no birds at Belsen. And really it just felt like the cruelty of humanity was going to be examined down to the finest detail, filtered through Richie's kind of amazing intellect.
Yeah, and we're going to keep coming back to some of these lyrical themes, but James, you start off by saying you regard it first and foremost as a great rock and roll record. And,
I do,
and let's start with some music and then explore some of the issues behind the album. And the first track you're going to play is Faster, which is the first single from the album, in fact, wasn't it? And I think, as I remember, you were opening the sets with it at the time as well.
Yeah, I think we were, and I was kind of pretending to do the John Lydon, hello, 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 kind of public image mantra at the start of it kind of thing.
We extended the intro.
We did, yeah.
Which was very hard for me. I kept coming in too early.
And we should just point out as well, I mean, this is a very hard, caustic-sounding record that you made, but here you are 20 years later at Maida Vale clutching acoustic instruments. I mean, it's a very different way of hearing the record, but in a way, this, I guess, is the way that you initially as a band would have heard the record, because this is the way the songs were written, James.
I remember Sean writing some of Intense, Some of Evil, and it was done on an acoustic guitar. I remember writing them at my mum and dad's house back in Pont Fife, and most of the tunes I wrote was on acoustic guitar, which is kind of strange because there's a lot of stuff that you only imagine that could be created on electric guitar.
And Sean, who's normally hidden behind a drum kit, is now here sitting on the stage on a cajon today. And Sean, your memories, just very briefly in a nutshell, of the recording of the record.
All I can remember is the very long commute from Bristol and how I had to get as much done in the time frame to be able to get on the last train back. So it was pretty fraught. I had to get a lot of things done quickly.
You were looking at it as a day's work on a day's
It was,
work,
and we didn't have the luxury of computers and Pro Tools to be able to fix things quickly. There was no edits. Everything was done pretty much,
live.
Complete and live.
So there are a lot of live takes, which again is what you're going to be doing now. I mean, I always think that Mastertapes, what we're doing is offering listeners an insight into the way that the songs were originally written. In a way, these are performances that are more akin to the initial demos. So give us a sense of how Faster may have sounded in its first outing.
It's pretty much the last lyric I ever co-wrote with Richie. I've been doing a box set for the Holy Bible 20 years. In my notebooks is these repeated phrases of so damn easy to cave in, man kills everything. If you stand up like a nail, you will be knocked down. Being too honest with myself, should have lied like everybody else. And the title, and then Richie filled in everything else.
Right.
Which is still mostly his, obviously, but it was the last time, really, that we ever sort of swapped lines, shall we say.
And you say also about the literary influences because he was coming into the studio and he was reading so much, and we get it here in this strong. Yeah. I am stronger than Mensa, Miller and Mailer. I spat out Plath and Pinter. I mean, there are so many words by any pop music standards. There are so many words within these songs, and this one in particular.
I do remember vividly trying to write the music to that in Mum and Dad's kitchen. And, yeah, I started counting how many times I'd failed. It did get to 20 times. It did. And I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know whether to make it a prog rock, convulse, kind of like a big splurge, and then in the end, the simplest idea worked, and that was the 20th idea.
As a very hard and
just
fast, right down the line.
Strychnine, kind of straight lines with jagged edges coming off it. It just felt like suddenly things were changing when you saw that lyric. Somebody wrote in one of the reviews, as soon as you heard Faster, you realised the stakes had been raised, and that's where it felt when you were looking at the lyric. Yeah. The stakes were raised all
live acoustic version of Faster by the Manic Street Preachers from the 1994 album The Holy Bible. And the opening line, Nicky, as well, I am an architect. I mean, there's echoes there of I am an anarchist, and I'm sure that was intentional. I am an architect. They call me a butcher. Was that a reference to self-harm? Because, I mean, there had been episodes already, hadn't there, when Richie had cut himself.
The trouble with a lot of these lyrics is that we didn't really talk about lyrics. We had an instinctive sense, but you can never exactly indulge yourself that you knew exactly what he was trying to say. I can't. I think I knew him pretty well. It's quite Mannix-esque, really, that, you know, I am superior to all the past literature that has ever existed. We just felt beautifully obscured from the whole world.
Yeah, and you say the world, the musical world around you, Britpop was just emerging. Did this album not come out around the same time or even on the same day as definitely maybe the first Oasis album?
It did, yeah, the same week. We were number 6. 22,000 first week. It was not bad, actually. I was quite pleased with that. I mean, Faster was a top 20 hit. I remember the first time it was on Radio 1, and now something a bit different. I think I had managed to convince James that She Is Suffering could be our Every Breath You Take.
So hang on, so you did still see them as pop songs, even though lyrically they were obscure. And actually, let me just ask you about that, James, because Nicky said he didn't really understand everything that was there on the page that Richie was handing him. Was it not important for you, as the person who had to then deliver these lyrics in public, to know exactly what he was singing about?
Yeah, I mean, let's not pretend, you know, there were some references there that I'd go and ask Richie. I said, what does this mean? Even something as simple as I tea them 24/7, which it means I toss them, kind of thing.
Edit.
Edit.
And Yes is the opening track on the album, which seems to be about prostitution. It seems to be about child prostitution. There's all sorts of terrible scenarios being played out in that song. Were there any moments when you said, hang on a minute, I can't sing this?
Yeah, I kind of, yes, felt awkward. Even Archives of Pain felt awkward for me, for a completely different reason.
Archives of Pain is about killers, it's about serial killers, and it's also, it seems to be saying that capital punishment is necessary.
Yes, it's Janus-headed philosophy, when right and left become indiscernible. He was saying that things had gotten to such a peak of extremity that that's what had happened in his head.
When he gave me that lyric, Archives of Pain, he just went, I think you like this one, Wire. No, I didn't write a word of it, but I did. I thought it was, at that point, to take that kind of standpoint, it's just so brave. To write a song to it's brave enough, but, you know, to put it out into the outside world, it just felt like, apart from maybe in Utero, we had nothing in common with anyone.
Except for the rock and roll spirit of Oasis, a tiny bit. Because me and Richie went to see Oasis at TJ's in Newport, and he kind of...
Richie loved them. He loved that first record.
It was cool as hell. Kind of thing.
And he liked the way the first thing Liam said was, oh, the Macs are coming down tonight. Do they want to fight?
Let's bring in the first question from the audience at this point. Amanda Colvert, who is a primary school teaching assistant. Amanda, you have the first question.
20 years ago, you inspired me to return to education at age 27. You enthused me by your intelligence and knowledge. Who inspired you to change the direction in your lives?
My direction was always pretty solid, to be honest, because my mum and dad are so great, and there's always books in the house. But I have to say a mixture of Morrissey and just watching TV, really. I think certain aspects of television growing up, just such a superior education to anything I learned at school. No offence to you as a teacher. Sorry.
Let me just bring Amanda back in at this point. What was it particularly about the Manic Street Preachers? I mean, lyrically, was it because of the literary references and the references to art movements?
Yeah, it was because I didn't really put 100% in my schooling when I was younger, and then I had 2 children, and I just used to listen to all the quotes that you used to do in the lyrics. It just really inspired me. I just wanted to go back and be intelligent and do something with my life.
That must be great to hear that, Nicky. But, I mean, so many Manic Street Preachers fans talk about that, about being introduced to certain books or paintings or films because of the references.
Undoubtedly, we've influenced more people in an educational way than we have bands. All we've ever done is try to be a conduit and pass things on that we think sometimes a lot better than we can say ourselves.
Right, and you've always done that right from the outset, the first album, in fact, the very first single. I mean, I've got a copy here of You Love Us, the picture sleeve, and there's a collage of photographs on there, and whether it's the film Betty Blue there, or there's an image of Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver and Marilyn Monroe on the back. I mean, that was always a mission statement, do you think, as a band, to share your love of, popular culture?
It was. I mean, we were just trying to show what our bedrooms were like.
Yes.
They really were, I remember there was a an early incarnation of Sky TV piped into our street in 1980.
Slightly dodgily, you have to say.
Yes, it was. It was a bit 1986, 87.
Right.
And basically they'd say it was like drug dealing. It was just like saying, you can watch all these channels for 2 months and then we'll switch it off and you can subscribe if you want. But they didn't switch ours off. And we didn't tell them. So me and Sean were just watching films like Rumblefish, films like Betty Blue on endless rotation, Jacob's Ladder, stuff like that. That was a massive thing for me and Mauro.
So when you
hooky TV and watching great films.
But when you first sat down together, and you're all at school together in Blackwood in South Wales, weren't you?
Yes.
And you formed the band together. Was that mission statement there, and that idea of putting out this shared aesthetic, was that always there, bound up with the music and the rock and roll?
I think from about the fifth form of comprehensive, I think we had a subconscious realisation that politics could be so drab. We witnessed that in the valleys. Even though it was vital and they were amazing people, sometimes it could turn people off.
Yeah.
I think we had that subconscious realisation that if we wanted to talk about some issues from the place we grew up in, we had to have a different angle.
I'd always been obsessed with that kind of visual element of rock and roll, really. My bedroom wall just kind of proved that. And I just quickly realised that to express ourselves and get our point across, we had almost been quite cartoonish at the start. We could never have got away with putting overcoats on and pretending to be like a cool Manchester band or something, or a Liverpool band, because we were from Nowheresville in the middle of a valley in South Wales. So
the image was a provocation as well?
Yeah.
The first time I saw you on stage, you were wearing a feather boa.
Yes. I mean, I am guilty of forcing James and Sean to wear blouses and all the rest of it. I will take that punishment.
And Sean, what were you bringing, when the band first came together, Sean, what were you bringing to the mix musically? And were you signing up to this idea of a kind of a cultural manifesto?
Completely. I mean, Nick's brother Patrick was probably one of the biggest influences. He brought a lot from when he went to university. He sort of introduced us to beat poetry, and I combined that with the sort of jazz that I was interested in when I was playing in brass bands when I was young. And it just sort of grew from then, and obviously with the cable TV that we were watching, just sort of absorb as much culture as you can.
It is true, Sean was just trying to learn Charlie Parker riffs in the house, and that was really had quite a big effect on me. He really turned me on to a lot of music I wouldn't listen to otherwise. And Pat, Nick's brother, was just amazing. He'd invite you to come down the park and read Kerouac out loud with a can of Albright and a bag of chips, which is just amazing. It was brilliant.
It was a relief to get him out the house from me.
And then when I was in school with Richie, we used to have free time in music lessons because we were in the same class. And they'd ask us to bring in our own music. And he would bring in albums by The Fall and Einstein and Newbarton and all these mad things, and sort of discovered Echo and the Bunnymen together, and that sort of grew from then.
Well, let's move on to the way that the songs on the Holy Bible were conceived and written, and we'll have another question from the audience here at the BBC Maida Vale studios. This one comes from Holly Carter, who's studying guitar at Music College. Holly.
Can you remember what song from the Holy Bible you first began working on as a whole band, and to what extent did that song set the tone for the rest of the album?
The first song that we recorded in the studio was 4 Stone 7 Pounds. He's looking at me as he's doubting me.
No, you're right. I was trying to think of the first one that was written. Yeah. I know that was the first one.
And it was a tough one because there's lots of changes in it. It's probably got the most lyrics than all the other songs. I remember I looked like hell. I'd just been dumped by my girlfriend. I just had dumped by my girlfriend beard, like cold sore. And it was, I think it was Valentine's Day. But I remember there was rehearsal rooms downstairs. And I remember rehearsing Faster down there, If White America down there. And we gave up in If White America, rehearsing it. And Sean went, it's all right, I know what I'm doing, I'll be okay. And it was amazing.
Amazing drum track.
So the first song that you recorded was 4 Stone 7 Pounds, which, I mean, as you say, musically is difficult for you to get your head around, but also lyrically, again, this is a song which addresses anorexia. Richie had anorexia, didn't he? I mean, he had lost a lot of weight. He was battling with that, and that was bound up with depression. So did you realise he was writing there autobiographically, even though it was written from the point of view of a young female protagonist?
If I'm honest, from my point of view, I think I probably blocked it out, because at that point, he seemed pretty well adjusted and pretty happy. It wasn't until afterwards where you realised the full kind of nature of it all. It seemed more kind of journalistic. So much of our history at this point was loaded with that kind of stuff. We'd kind of got used to it.
It is such a bleak and depressing song, but it does also contain such beautiful imagery as well. I mean, I want to walk in the snow and not leave a footprint. I want to walk in the snow and not soil its purity. That sort of thing, that kind of expression, you're then having to kind of set to music. And the music of this song in particular is brutal, isn't it? But it has a coda, which is almost like a resolution.
I looked at the main body of the lyric and I thought I wanted to reflect the frenetic nature of that vanity. It keeps analysing itself and keeps trying to find a reason for something which is so irrational.
Constantly looking in the mirror.
Yeah, and then I suppose in my kind of coney head, I wanted there to be a resolution in the end. I wanted there to be some kind of defeat because the lyrics at the end seemed to kind of like have a self-knowing, right observation about themselves, that they knew that they were being kind of irrational, but they couldn't stop it.
So it's an incredibly beautiful setting for a really disturbing set of lyrics. And this is the first time that you've really revisited this album and you're having to play these songs for the first time and relearn them. Or have you found that they are hardwired in?
I think they're hardwired in. The volume of lyrics is so gigantic that inevitably some lyrics are not going to be there in my old suite. Apart from that, I do think Sean has been playing If White America, Tell the Truth, One Day This World Will Fall Apart. You know, he just hasn't forgotten any part of it, and that's an amazing drum track. You know, why is...
Struggling.
Struggling at all. So I think it's all there. It is all there, definitely.
That line, that choice is skeletal in everybody's life, I mean, it's just unbelievably brilliant and concise and poetic, and I've long since reached a higher plateau. I've never heard plateau in a lyric before.
And when he was bringing these lyrics in and you were reading them and you were getting an insight into his mind, and obviously retrospectively people now listen to this album, read the lyrics and think, this is a guy who's in a mess, you know, he needs help. What were you thinking looking at these notebooks for the first time?
I thought he was being a bit more vicarious than that. I assumed that some of the songs were vicariously written from other people's point of view, or him observing other people. I didn't assume that it was all about him.
I Am Stronger Than Mensa is obviously a statement of power and kind of self-control. And obviously, mixed with that, there's a lot of problems and nihilism as well. I think, yes, it's very much applicable to how he felt as being in the band, and the band kind of prostituting itself. We used to...
Oh, he was looking at that as a metaphor then, for life within a band.
Definitely, because this bit of artwork he did where he used to rip off the TSB Bank and just go, MSP, the band that likes to say yes.
Oh, right.
There was an element of, not pathos, but, you know, kind of self-realisation in it. Walking Abortions is actually, I kind of started that lyric myself, and then he took it to another level of hatefulness, I guess.
And you've kept all the notebooks, so there is a vast archive, isn't there? So,
yeah.
I mean, you've been back through them recently because you're reissuing this album. Has it surprised you looking back and seeing who was doing what, the division of labour with?
Yeah, little things, like my original title for the album was The Poetry of Death. It's hardly uplifting. There's certain lyrics which I can remember the first time that James sang them, and you're just wondering how they were conceived, really. They're almost like prose, brilliant bits of concise prose. If White America kind of was, I think it was my title, and there's a few of my lines in that.
If White, and it's a really strange title, this one, isn't it? If White America told the truth, then its world would fall apart.
For one day.
No, it's not for one day.
If White America told the truth for one day.
For one day.
Is it?
Yeah.
There is one song which serves as a kind of musical and lyrical respite from the sense of emotional rage and the musical, the tone. and the speed of the rest of them. And This Is Yesterday. Is that your one, Nicky?
Pretty much, yeah. Most of it's mine. Richard did add, I think, maybe 4 or 5 lines, maybe, or
Right.
4 lines, I think.
And he's told it's a very melancholy song, isn't it? It seems to be looking back to happy youth.
Yes, at 24, I'm already looking back. This is a recurring theme in my life.
To the sunlit uplands.
Indeed, yeah.